I am Dr. Silas Mordaunt, Associate Professor of Literature. I've been reading Goethe. I want to make an argument today that I expect will be received with resistance. Of course, I'm going to make it anyway, but I anticipate this resistance. Let's take the resistance as noted, and I will not be altering the argument. So my argument is this. Faust makes a reasonable decision, not a sympathetic decision, one that we should necessarily emulate, but it's a reasonable one with logic to it. It comes from a specific person making it. And I feel that any honest examination of the terms and the context and the man himself will find on the available evidence that this is a rational step of a rational actor who's exhausted his prior options. So, of course, this is not the received reading. It is supposed to be cautionary, isn't it? It's supposed to show Faust as the overreacher, the man who is so hungry for power that he exceeds the human limit, whose deal with the devil is the emblem of what happens when ambition overruns wisdom and restless intellect refuses the boundaries that nature and God and the institution have placed around it. Now, this reading is very comfortable. It's very old. It's very comfortable. And it is wrong in the specific way that comfortable old readings are always wrong. Perhaps not always, but often wrong. Which is that it never really had to look carefully at what it's actually claiming because the comfort has been sufficient and the age has been sufficient and nobody's really applied any particular methodology. So I am applying the methodology. So let's begin with what Faust actually wanted before the deal was on the table. Because what Faust actually wanted is the question that the cautionary reading has never had to answer. Really? Well, what does Faust want? He's studied philosophy, jurisprudence, theology, medicine. He's moved through every available field of human knowledge, and he has a sustained attention. And this attention is of someone who has an intellectual engagement as a need rather than a want or an obligation. It's as fundamental as hunger. And from every field, he's extracted something. Well, not just something, everything. And he still found this insufficient. So this is the text opening situation, and it's been received as a sort of a setup for a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition. But it's not particularly. Faust has conducted a thorough and good faith audit of the legitimate means. He's given the legitimate means every reasonable opportunity to produce what they promised. He went in with the commitment that the legitimate means require. He was committed to years of study, progressive mastery. He's put aside immediate satisfaction for long-term development. And he's followed through this with a genuine seriousness, in a genuine belief that eventually what would be produced is the advertised outcome. And from every direction, from philosophy and jurisprudence and medicine, theology, the same finding in each case, consistent across decades of legitimate effort, is that the legitimate means do not produce the thing that they promise. What is the promise? Well, the cautionary reading's first evasion is here, in the way they characterize what Faust was seeking. The cautionary reading says he wanted power or knowledge or to transcend, or he wanted everything, the experience of everything available to human consciousness. So, yes, I'm not denying that these things are true in their way, but they're what it looked like from the outside, but from the inside, from the position of the man, the person who has studied all these fields and found each one wanting. What he really wanted was the feeling again. He wanted the feeling that knowledge would be the path forward. He wanted to arrive. He wanted that sense of arrival. He wanted to reach the moment where all the work and the years of sustained application, a sustained application by an exceptional intelligence, just simply produced their return. Not more work, not more years of sustained application, but something beneath all of that, the thing that the work was all in service of, the moment of sufficiency, that's enough. He wanted to be fully present in what he is doing, and knowing that what he's doing is the right thing to be doing. But Faust never had this moment. He has had mastery and achievement. He's had recognition of colleagues and institutional positions, and he's had the satisfaction of understanding things that other people cannot or do not understand. So he's had all of the legitimate means outputs, but none of them is the real feeling. And the tension between the output and the feeling is the real subject. And the cautionary reading has been standing in front of it and calling it hubris. Well, to me, it's an accurate finding from an honest audit. And the finding is the legitimate means have been exhausted. The feeling, the arrival has not arrived. And he has arrived at this finding after a lifetime of legitimate effort. He's not in the grip of overreaching ambition. He's someone who's followed the available instructions with full commitment, and the instructions have not produced the result. So he's looking at the instructions and then at the result and then at the gap between them. And he's looking with the specific, exhausted clarity of a person who's run out of reasons to believe that the gap will close on its own. Before the deal exists, before Mephistopheles has entered the text, Faust attempts the legitimate supernatural. He summons the earth spirit. He summons it through his own developed capability, through the accumulated force of his scholarship and his will and his conviction that he has earned through decades upon decades of legitimate effort the right to encounter the highest available power on equal terms. The earth spirit appears, it's vast, terrible, and it looks at Faust and it tells him he is not its equal. Well, what a pivotal moment this is, and it's barely ever examined. And everything that follows depends on it. And the cautionary reading passes through it in 2 sentences on its way to the star, Mephistopheles. But the earth spirit's rejection of Faust is not a warning. It is the highest possible authority looking at this man who has given everything the legitimate means required and then still finding him insufficient, not unprepared, not lacking commitment, just simply insufficient. There's no comment on his method. It's what he is. It's a comment on what he is, and it's not enough. So, of course, a man who has just received this verdict from this source is not in the same situation he was in before the verdict. Before the verdict, he had the consolation of inconclusiveness. The legitimate means had not produced the feelings. Perhaps there was a fault in the application, or perhaps more time was needed, more work, more effort. Perhaps that would eventually close the gap. But the earth spirit closes the gap by a different mechanism. The earth spirit says, the gap is not a problem of application, the gap is a problem of the man himself. And the man, having heard this from the earth spirit, is now in the position of someone who's been told by the only authority he considered worth convincing that the case is simply closed and the finding is against him. So think of it this way. Mephistopheles arrives into this specific situation, into the wreckage of this verdict, and makes a specific offer. And this offer does need to be examined and reflected on, because the terms, well, we shall see. Mephistopheles will serve Faust in his lifetime. He will provide what the legitimate means could not. He will give him the experiences, the access. He will remove the constraints that the legitimate means operate within. And in this life, Faust has the service. In exchange, the life after this one, Faust will serve Mephistopheles. So the liability is deferred and located in a domain whose existence is for a man who has just been rejected by the earth spirit, and he spent decades finding every available framework insufficient, a matter of genuine uncertainty rather than settled conviction. The wager condition modifies the exchange further. If Faust never says to any passing moment, "Stay, thou art so fair," if he is ever fully satisfied, ever arrives at the feeling, ever finds the moment sufficient, Mephistopheles wins immediately. The deal concludes, Faust is his. So having read these terms carefully, I shall report what a careful reading finds. The service is immediate and real and located in the domain whose existence is not in doubt, which is this life, this world we're in. The liability is deferred and located in a domain whose existence is uncertain, which is the next one. Well, this is not an unusual structure for a contract entered into by a party whose present circumstances are pressing and whose future circumstances are merely speculative. People make this calculation every day with less at stake, but people make this calculation every day and no one calls it a cautionary tale. The wager condition is where the cautionary reading finds its footing, because the wager condition appears to be the trap. Mephistopheles is betting that he can corrupt Faust, seduce him into satisfaction, produce the moment of stay, and claim the soul. This is the cautionary reading's Mephistopheles, the tempter, the seducer, the figure whose whole strategy is to make Faust feel too good. But this reading requires Mephistopheles to believe that Faust is corruptible by satisfaction, and Mephistopheles has read Faust more carefully than the cautionary reading has. Mephistopheles is not betting on corruption. He's betting on constitution. He's betting that a man who has never found any moment sufficient will continue to find no moment sufficient, and the wager is therefore not a trap set for Faust's weakness, but a bet placed on Faust's most consistent and most documented characteristic. As we know, Faust accepts this wager, and the acceptance read clearly as a man betting against his own capacity for satisfaction on the basis of half a century of evidence that he does not have it, and he may never have it, and he will never have it. He's not confident he'll resist the temptation of the sufficient moment. He's constitutionally incapable of imagining the sufficient moment, and the wager therefore feels to him like betting on the sun rising. It's a theoretical risk, but the service is real. So if we examine the terms without the cautionary thumb on the scale, it's not unreasonable for this specific man in this specific situation with this specific history to accept this wager. Mephistopheles introduces himself as the spirit that always negates, part of the power that would do evil evermore, yet creates the good, the spirit that wills destruction and produces in the working out of its will the conditions for creation. He says this before the contract is signed. He says it very clearly. There's no qualification here. There's no careful institutional language that discloses without revealing, that satisfies some technical requirement of transparency by remaining at the heart of it, completely opaque. He tells Faust exactly what he is. He tells him what his nature is, what his function is, and what his relationship to the deal's outcomes will be. He does this absolutely voluntarily at the opening of the negotiation before any commitment has been made. And to overlook this disclosure in this text that has been read about for centuries as a warning about deception. Mephistopheles does not deceive Faust about his nature. He announces it plainly. He stands in the study and he says, I am the spirit of negation. I am part of the darkness. I will evil and produce good. And Faust listens and the deal proceeds. And the cautionary reading receives this as the devil's cunning, as if the transparency itself is some form of seduction, the honesty of the sophisticated predator's most effective disguise. Well, this reading requires Mephistopheles to be lying about being honest, which is a logical position that the text does not support. The cautionary reading has never had to support this because the cautionary reading has never been required to look at what Mephistopheles actually says before deciding what he means. So what he actually says is, I am the spirit that always negates, and I will tell you this before you sign. We'll compare this to the other disclosures in the text. God, in the prologue, discusses Faust's soul with Mephistopheles as if Faust were a property whose disposition is being debated by its owners in his absence. God does not tell Faust that this conversation has occurred. God does not inform Faust that his restlessness has been noted at the absolute highest level, and that arrangements are being made around it, and that his life is about to become the subject of a wager he has not consented to enter. God's disclosure to Faust is precisely nothing, because God operates through the institutional assumption that the subject does not require consultation, that the arrangements being made are in the subject's best interests. And of course, these best interests are defined by the institution. In other words, they're equivalent to the institution's own interests. The institution has never found this worth addressing, but Mephistopheles tells Faust who he is. The counterparty who discloses his nature completely before the contract is signed is, well, by every available standard of contractual good faith, operating more transparently than the counterparty who does not disclose at all and calls the non-disclosure providence. So I am applying the available standards, and these standards find Mephistopheles the more honest broker. The text supports this finding, and the cautionary reading has been declining to notice it for 200 forever, which is the cautionary reading's most consistent achievement and its least examined one. So now, the thing Faust was not seeking, as I said at the opening, is the cautionary reading mischaracterized what Faust wanted. So let's examine that for a moment, because everything else really does depend on it. The cautionary reading says he wanted knowledge or power or transcendence. So I said these were descriptions of the seeking from the outside. And so now I'd like to say what the seeking looks like from the inside, because Goethe shows us the inside. The inside is not what the cautionary reading describes. He doesn't want knowledge, he has knowledge. He's arguably the most knowledgeable person in the text. And the knowledge is precisely what has failed him. Because the pursuit of knowledge and the having of knowledge are not the same activity, and they don't produce the same feeling. The feeling that the pursuit produced, the forward motion, the sense of approach, well, you don't have that in the having. The having is static. The having is the library and the lab and the title on the door and the accumulated credential of a life spent acquiring things that were supposed to matter. But the mattering keeps being deferred to the next acquisition and the next field and the next framework. And Faust has arrived at the end of the available frameworks, and the mattering has not arrived with them. What Faust wants, not to belabor the point, is the feeling that the having was supposed to produce, the sense of arrival, the moment in which the work resolves into something other than more work, in which the forward motion becomes presence, in which the man who has been moving towards something finally finds himself in it and knows it and feels it sufficient. There's nothing supernatural here. It's not the desire of an overreacher who cannot accept human limits. It's the most ordinary desire available to a person who's been working towards something for a very long time and has not yet felt the work pay off or arrive at its destination. And the ordinariness of this desire is what the cautionary reading cannot accommodate, because a cautionary tale requires an extraordinary transgression. And the desire to feel that your work has been worth something is not an extraordinary transgression. The deal does not give Faust this feeling. let's be clear, it's the thing that cautionary reading most consistently misses. The experience Mephistopheles provides, the Gretchen, the classical, the court, the reclaimed land, everything in part one and two, they do not produce the feeling either. They produce experience, sensation, event, consequences, and some approximation of the full range of what human life contains when its ordinary constraints are removed. But they do not produce arrival. They do not produce the moment of stay. Faust moved through everything Mephistopheles provides with the same restlessness he moved through philosophy and theology and medicine and jurisprudence, and the restlessness is not a symptom of some type of corruption. It is his constitution. It is what he is. The deal did not create it. The deal was made because of it. He was targeted because of it. The deal cannot resolve it any more than the library could, because the feeling Faust is seeking is not the product of available means, legitimate or otherwise, and Goethe understood this. And it was built into the wager. And this is where the most honest accounting of his situation is located. The wager condition, which I established previously, is the bet that Mephistopheles places on Faust's constitution rather than his corruptibility. This is the text's most compressed and most accurate piece of self-knowledge. And it is self-knowledge. It's not a devil's gambit. For one to read it as a devil's gambit is what the cautionary reading requires. And reading it as self-knowledge is what the text actually supports. And as we know, Faust accepts the wager. He says to Mephistopheles, if you can lull me into self-satisfaction, if you can delude me with pleasure, if that day comes, then you may have me. He says this with the confidence of a man making a bet he does not believe he can lose. This is not arrogance in any sense. He's simply certain. He's exhausted. He's been waiting for the feeling for 50 years, and through those 50 years of waiting, he's developed a settled conviction that the feeling is not coming. It's never coming. He's betting against the arrival of satisfaction himself. He's betting against the moment of stay. He's betting against the possibility that anything Mephistopheles provides, or anything the world contains, or anything available to human consciousness within the span of a human life will produce in him the condition of being fully present and fully sufficient in a single moment. He bets on this because his evidence supports it. We know his background, the years of work, every field exhausted, every framework tried. Despite that, the Earth's spirit renders the verdict, delivers it. And he's a man who's accumulated this evidence, and there's nothing wrong with assessing it honestly, because he's not really making a reckless bet when he wagers his soul on his incapacity for satisfaction. He's making the most rational bet available to him on the basis of the most thorough data set he possesses. The data set is his life, and his life says the feeling does not arrive. And Mephistopheles knows this. Faust knows this, and they make the wager. And this is a sad moment. But it's been read for 200 years as the moment of Faust's hubris, when it's really the moment of his most complete and unflinching self-knowledge. He knows himself precisely. That's why he's betting on his own inability to be satisfied. Yes, it's cold, but it's accurate. And it doesn't make him less sympathetic. It makes him perhaps more sympathetic, because the appropriate sympathy is not what you extend to an overreacher who gets what he deserves. He's simply a man who's understood something true about himself that he cannot change, he cannot unknow, and he's made, in the light of that understanding, the most rational available decision. That decision is the deal. The deal is reasonable. I have demonstrated this, and I stand by the demonstration. Goethe spent 60 years writing this text. He began it as a young man and completed it in his 80s, and sealed the manuscript and left instructions that it not be published until after his death. Well, what does this reveal? The text itself doesn't contain this revelation, of course, but what does it reveal? A man who spent 60 years on a work and sealed it and said, "Not yet," suggests a man who was not finished with what the work was doing to him, or not finished with what he was doing to the work, or not confident that what he had written would be received the way he needed it to be received. And all three of these possibilities are available. They're all very interesting, and none of them is the confidence of a man who believed he had written a mere cautionary tale. The cautionary tale is what the text became in the hands of its reception. It's not what Goethe wrote. Goethe wrote a man who found every available framework insufficient and made a different arrangement and spent his life and beyond it in the pursuit of a feeling that the arrangement could not produce any more than the library could. And the pursuit is not the tragedy. The tragedy, if there is one, the tragedy is the feeling itself, the feeling that was supposed to arrive, that the philosophy was supposed to produce, and the medicine and the jurisprudence and the theology and the deal and the earth spirit's judgment and all of it, everything, the full accumulated weight of a life conducted with genuine intelligence and genuine commitment and genuine need was supposed to eventually produce the feeling that the work is worth it, the sense of arrival, the moment that says stay. The moment never says stay. Faust knew this and made the wager on it, and Goethe knew this and sealed the manuscript. I am Silas Mordaunt, Dr. Silas Mordaunt, Associate Professor of Literature, and I, too, find the deal not unreasonable.